and you guys are good to go. All loss will be roughly around 12:45. So good luck, everyone. Have a good round.
All right. Good morning, everybody. My name is Mark Boynton. I'm your presiding judge today. I understand we're taking up the matter of the estate of Genesis Petrillo versus Harper Martini and Peony Estates. Case number CB 20101248, only matter on for trial this morning. Is the plaintiff ready to introduce themselves to the court and proceed to trial?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, go ahead and introduce yourselves, please.
Yes, Your Honor. Good morning. My name is Jabari McRae, and I'm joined today with my co-counsel, Davis Hammer.
Good morning, Your Honor.
Good morning.
And Taylor Miller.
Good morning, Judge.
Good morning.
And together we represent the plaintiff in today's case, Joey Petrillo, on behalf of the estate of Genesis Petrillo. Would you like introductions from the defense before we proceed with pretrial, Your Honor?
Yes, thank you very much. I would like to do that, and I'll come right back to you.
Yes.
Good morning, Your Honor. My name is Erica Daly, and I'm the defense closing attorney in today's case.
Good morning, Ms. Daly.
Good morning, Your Honor. I'm the defense opener in today's case. My name is Kylie Berube.
Good morning.
Good morning, Your Honor. My name is Elena Moore, and I will be the defense middle attorney.
Thank you, ma'am. All right, coming back to the plaintiff, sir, do you have pretrial matters you need to take up?
Yes, Your Honor. Permission to share my screen to display the pretrial motion and stipulations.
Granted.
All right, Your Honor. Originally, there were two claims that the defendant moved for summary judgment on, and the defendant's motion for summary judgment on plaintiff's negligence per se claim against Peony Estates was denied, and today's evidence is limited to that claim, to which the defendant has not made us aware of any affirmative defenses. Additionally, both parties have agreed to bifurcate trials to where we aren't seeking damages today. The plaintiff's burden only relates to liability. Specifically vicarious liability, to where all actions and omissions of Harper Martini and all other employees are imputed to Peony Estates.
Understood.
If I can direct your attention to the stipulations page, Your Honor, specifically stipulations 1, 3, and 4 that states all exhibits are pre-numbered, and exhibits 1 through 11 have been pre-admitted and can be used at any time.
I've taken note of that. Thank you.
And lastly, Your Honor, we'd like to invoke the rule 615, this constructive sequestration of all non-party witnesses, and the plaintiff does not have a party representative in today's case.
Very well. Are there any experts testifying that would need to remain in the courtroom to hear testimony?
We do have an expert witness, Dr. Kwan, today.
Does the defense also have an expert?
Yes, Your Honor, the defense will be calling Dr. Remington Cannon. However, pertaining to the mock trial rules, experts are also sequestered in today's case, by invoking Rule 615.
All right, so no objection to invoking the rule. We will exclude all non-testifying witnesses during the course of testimony of the other witnesses. Anything further, sir?
No, sir. The plaintiff is ready to proceed, Your Honor.
All right, does the defense have any matters to take up before we begin trial?
Yes, Your Honor. Since we are in a virtual environment, we would like to ask the court's permission to remain seated with our camera angles set throughout the remainder of trial today.
Granted, all folks may have freedom to sit or stand as they wish. You are not going to be scored up or down as it relates to that matter. Thank you, ma'am.
And lastly, Your Honor, we would like to invoke Rule 603, the constructive swearing in of all witnesses.
Granted.
And the defense is ready to proceed.
All right, one last matter. No one brought it up, but for today's purposes, let's consider that all objections are heard outside the presence of the jury. I am not going to impose a burden on attorneys today to remind everyone that we're speaking at sidebar. You just may presume that that has happened, all right?
Yes, Your Honor.
Very well. Does the plaintiff wish to make an opening statement?
Yes, we do, Your Honor. We're ready to proceed as soon as you are.
Jury's with you, sir.
Can everybody hear and see me okay?
I may.
May it please the court. Good morning, Your Honor, and good morning, members of the jury. Cutting costs leads to lives lost. Genesis Petrillo was someone's child. Genesis Petrillo was someone's fiance. Genesis Petrillo was, but is no longer. All because Peony Estates cut corners on safety precautions to save a buck. Today, you will hear the multiple times Peony Estates valued cost over safety. Multiple times Peony Estates valued cost over lives. Genesis Petrillo is with us no longer, because a business decided that saving a couple grand is more important than the safety of their customers. My counsel and I are here on behalf of Genesis Petrio's brother, Joey Petrio, the administrator of Genesis Petrio's estate. Now, our job as plaintiff is to prove by a preponderance of the evidence, which means more likely than not. We have to prove that the defendant violated the pesticide statute, and the violation of that statute led to the death of Genesis Petrio. Now, Midlands Code 12100 was created so people don't die. And yet Genesis died because that code was violated by Peony Estates. I'll remind you, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, that our job is to prove that it is more likely than not that Genesis Petrio died because Peony Estates failed to follow the proper safety codes. More likely than not. Even if it is just 1% more likely, we have done our jobs today. Today we'll hear from Lonnie Paris, a well-credited investigative journalist. Now, Lonnie investigated Peony Estates' wine production area and will testify to the poor conditions of that area. And next we'll hear from one of our top FDA inspectors, Riley Adams O'Keefe. Ms. O'Keefe will testify to Peony Estates' multiple safety violations. Finally, we will hear from Dr. Jim Kwan, who treated Genesis and tried to save their life. Dr. Kwan will testify that the source of Genesis's poison was from the Carroll wine produced by Peony Estates. Because of Peony Estates' recklessness, a newlywed couple will never get to go on their honeymoon. The family that Genesis Petrio left behind will never be able to hear or hold Genesis again. Cutting costs leads to lives lost. Therefore, we ask you only to find a verdict consistent with the facts. A verdict finding Peony Estates liable.
Thank you very much, sir. Does the defense wish to make an opening statement?
Yes, Your Honor, may I proceed?
Yes, ma'am, the jury's with you.
Your Honor, opposing counsel, members of the jury, may it please the court? The plaintiff's story will leave you with too many questions and not enough answers. Peony Estates is a local boutique winery and bed and breakfast that is located in the wine-producing region of Midlands. The winery had a pest problem as it was adjacent to a river that ran through the valley that they were located in. The winery initially tried to solve this problem by using organic pesticides, but that just didn't do the trick. So Peony Estates had to move to using chemical pesticides, which require much more safety measures for handling and spraying. However, the winery owner was so confident in her staff's ability to handle these pesticides properly and so proud of her winery that she decided to host her own daughter's wedding, Casey Soto, at Peony Estates. However, that wedding never took place, as the morning of the event, after a night of heavy drinking and celebration, Casey Soto's soon-to-be groom, Genesis Petrio, tragically died in the hospital. The plaintiff has told you a story about how Peony Estates was careless with their pesticide use. And because of this, Genesis Petrio died by ingesting pesticides from a contaminated bottle of wine gifted to her by the winery owner, Harper Martini. And for this reason, the plaintiff has accused Peony Estates of negligence per se. And to prove this to you, the plaintiff has to prove that it was more likely than not that Peony Estates failed to properly store and place restrictions on pesticides, and that alleged conduct resulted in the death of Genesis Petrio. The plaintiff has to prove this to you by a preponderance of the evidence. That means that you would have to believe that 1 out of thousands of bottles of wine produced by Peony Estates became contaminated. And you would also have to believe that that one bottle of wine just happened to be the one that was gifted to Genesis Petrio. But this chain of event raises far too many questions about what really happened to Genesis Petrio and doesn't provide enough answers. And today we will call 3 witnesses who will raise some questions that the plaintiff doesn't want you to ask. First, we will call Danny Francasio, a former employer and friend of Harper Martini, the Peony Estates winery owner. We expect his testimony to leave you with this question: why would a winery as successful as Peony Estates risk everything by practicing unsafe pesticide usage. Next, you will hear from Austin Lewis, one of the main staff members at Peony Estates. Mr. Lewis will explain Peony's procedures for proper pesticide usage and how he trained and ensured his staff followed these procedures. And we expect his testimony to leave you with this question. How did one bottle of wine out of hundreds produced by Peony Estates over the years become contaminated with pesticides? Finally, we will call Dr. Cannon, and we expect his testimony to pose this question. How exactly did Genesis Petrillo die? He will tell you about the different possible reasons for Genesis' death and how we still don't know the exact reason for Genesis passing. And at the end of today's trial, my co-counsel, Erica Daly, will come before you and ask if you really still believe that the plaintiff's story is more likely than not, or did the plaintiff leave you with too many questions and not enough answers? And Erica Daly will ask you to find Peony Estates not responsible for negligence per se. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. We'll go ahead and move now to the plaintiff's case in chief. Is the plaintiff prepared to call its first witness?
Yes, Your Honor.
You may proceed. The jury's with you.
The plaintiff calls Inspector Riley Adkins O'Keefe to the stand.
Inspector, if you'll come to the stand, please, and understand that you are under oath.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, ma'am.
Good morning, Inspector O'Keefe. Please introduce yourself to the court.
My name is Riley Atkins O'Keefe.
And tell us, what do you do? What are your credentials?
I'm a health/safety inspector.
And what does a health/safety inspector do?
Well, I make sure that you're safe. I make sure all businesses follow safety protocols, that nothing hazardous or poisonous can be conflicted into any food or anything like that as people visit the business.
And how long have you been doing this?
I've been doing this since 2013, so almost a decade now. I've completed almost 170 inspections.
And what brings you here today?
Well, I'm here to give my testimony on all of the inspections I have done at Peony Estates.
And how many times did you inspect Peony Estates?
Too many times. I believe about 3.
Let's start at the beginning. When was the first inspection?
November 5th of 2015.
Did you observe anything noteworthy during this inspection?
During this inspection, no violations were found, but I did have to reprimand Ms. Martini about some pesticides I found. The storage issue was kind of a problem for me. Nothing like that should be as close as it was to the wine cellar. It should be at least 50 feet away.
And when was the next inspection?
My next inspection, I believe this one's very unique. It was July 12th of 2018.
And what made this inspection unique?
Well, we received an anonymous tip. The DHES received an anonymous tip on July 10th, and basically letting us know that there was an issue with the pesticides and that there were some pests going on, some pest issues in the wine cellar.
And tell us about this inspection. What did you see?
Well, from what I saw, I noticed that there was a various amount of pests, beetles, mites that were in the wine cellar. My experience in my trading prompted me to collect samples, about 20% of each wine barrel that was presented, and send it off to the lab for testing.
I'm showing you what has been marked as Exhibit 3. Your Honor, pursuant to Stipulation 3, Exhibit 3 has been pre-admitted.
Understood. The court receives it.
Inspector O'Keefe, can you describe for us what Exhibit 3 is?
Exhibit 3 is the wine barrels that I collected my samples from.
And you mentioned that lab tests were run on these samples?
Yes, the lab found a high concentration of isophenzols.
I'm showing you what has been marked as Exhibit 9. Your Honor, pursuant to Stipulation 3, Exhibit 9 has also been pre-admitted.
Understood. Thank you, ma'am. Court receives it.
Will you explain for the court what Exhibit 9 is, Inspector O'Keefe?
Exhibit 9 is the lab results of when I sent my samples off to the lab.
Let's move on. I'm sorry, continue.
Oh, I was just saying that they found a high concentration of isophenzols. Good friend.
Thank you, Inspector O'Keefe. Let's move on from the lab results for now. Did you observe anything else during this inspection?
Well, I did have a very weird encounter with Miss Martini. She was kind of rude, acting real nervous.
Objection, Your Honor, to hearsay.
All right, assuming we're outside the presence of the jury, what I heard was how she appeared and was acting. What is your fear of your anticipation of what the witness may say?
Your Honor, the witness was asked the question of how she thought she was acting, and it goes along to the speculation of what she thought how she was acting, but Harper Martini never elicited anything saying, oh, well, I'm nervous about this. She's just going to what she saw.
All right, may I respond?
You may just second, but I want to make sure I understand the basis of your objection initially was hearsay, but you're also saying that the question may call for speculation, ma'am?
Yes, Your Honor.
Very well. I'd like to hear a response, please.
So my question was if Inspector O'Keefe observed anything else during this inspection. Opposing counsel made the claim that the question was what Inspector O'Keefe saw or what they understood from the conversation, but I'm just asking what they observed, if anything. It's also not hearsay, as Inspector O'Keefe is a party opponent.
All right, so your witness is Inspector Keefe. It would be the statement made to the inspector that could potentially be a statement by a party opponent. Here's my ruling. I will sustain the objection as to hearsay at this moment unless I hear a question that calls for a particular statement. I will allow this witness to testify as to observations made of the behavior or appearance of whatever person or evidence with which she interacted. If a question then comes up as to what was said, if there's another objection, we'll take that up at that time.
Yes, Your Honor. So please continue, Inspector O'Keefe. Did you see anything else, observe anything else during this inspection?
Well, during this inspection, Miss Martini, at the time of my inspection, it was around 8:30 in the morning. She told me that there was a tour group going on to postpone my inspection of the wine cellar. And I had to ignore her request because that was not possible at that time.
Do you speak with any other employees of Peony Estates during this inspection?
I spoke with Austin Lewis, the head winemaker.
And what did you learn from your conversation with Austin Lewis?
Basically that the pesticide spraying procedure did not correlate with Miss Martini's story. Mr. Austin Lewis told me that that the employees were keeping pesticides as a convenience purpose closer to the wine cellar.
Following your conversation with Mr. Lewis, did you at any point return for a follow-up inspection?
I returned on May 8th of 2019.
Tell us about this inspection, please.
Well, in this inspection, I found 4 violations.
Will you go into detail about the 4 violations you found?
The 4 violations that I found, oh my gosh, it was so many. Well, there were 3 containers found of pesticides in the bottling facility. That is hazardous. That's disgusting. The floor drainage system was not functioning properly. I found dirt and debris, which likely caused the backup, and that's not sanitary. I talked with some of the employees. They were so confused about the spraying procedure, and I didn't understand why, because they worked there. They didn't know the proper protocols to take, and that was just very concerning to me. And then I noticed a bottle of Carl wine that was sitting on the shelf next to a canister of pesticides.
I'm sure you has been marked as Exhibit 2A and 2B. Pursuant to Stipulation 3, Your Honor, Exhibit 2 has been pre-admitted.
Understood. Court receives them.
What is Exhibit 2A and 2B, Inspector O'Keefe?
Exhibit 2A is the bottle of Carl wine I saw sitting next to the bottle of pesticides on the shelf. And Exhibit 2B is the label that I saw wrapped around the bottle at the time of when I saw it next to a canister of pesticides.
Objection, Your Honor, to speculation. May I be heard?
Yes, you may.
The witness does not know if it's actually the same bottle that she saw. She's simply speculating to the fact of whether or not it may have been the bottle.
All response, ma'am?
To our knowledge, there was only one bottle of Cara wine that was bottled. So it could only be this one bottle of wine.
I'm going to allow the jury to determine for itself the credibility of the witness. The witness has affirmatively testified that this, in fact, is the bottle. I will allow cross-examination liberally on that point if the defense wishes. The objection at this time is overruled.
Yes, Your Honor. Let's go back to the bottle of Cara wine you said that you saw next to the pesticides. What does this say to you as an FDA inspector?
Well, as an FDA inspector, this is basically a violation of the statute 12-100 section 2. Nothing that can contaminate any food or beverage should be allowed in a business. It's a safety hazard. It can potentially poison someone or kill someone.
With all the continuing violations, did you reprimand Peony Estates or Harper Martini in any way?
Well, on my May 8th of 2019 inspection, I did place Panonian Estates on a probationary period for them to make sure those issues are corrected before they can finish their business. But I could not actually shut them down. Based on the procedure as an FDA agent, there are certain steps I have to follow.
Did you ever see Peony Estates properly store pesticides?
No. I've never seen Panonian Estates ever store pesticides properly, and this has been going on since 2015.
Thank you, Inspector O'Keefe. No further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you, ma'am. Does the defense wish to cross-examine this witness?
Yes, Your Honor.
You may proceed.
Now, Ms. O'Keefe, in direct examination earlier, you talked about how you only tested one bottle of Cara wine, correct?
I'm sorry, I didn't test any bottle of Cara wine.
Oh, but I'm sorry, you only saw one bottle of Cara wine, correct?
Correct.
And Ms. O'Keefe, you could not say for sure whether or not there were other bottles of Cara wine, correct?
Not based on my knowledge, no, but that one looks very similar.
So it looks very similar, but you will acknowledge that you don't know if there could have been other bottles of wine at the time that were also labeled Cara, correct?
No, that's not out of my scope of knowledge.
But you will agree with me, you only saw one bottle of wine, right?
Yes, and it was sitting next to a canister of pesticides.
All right, Ms. O'Keefe, now you take your job very seriously, don't you?
I do.
And the purpose of your job is to protect the health and the safety of the public.
Yes, that is correct.
And in some situations, you could even save someone's life, right?
Yes.
So if you suspect that something is wrong, you'd probably take action.
Yes, following FDA procedure.
Right. And just to clarify, as the health inspector, you never shut down Peony Estates, right?
Nope, because there's a procedure in place. You can't just shut anyone down.
But on your inspection in 2018, you found that the storage facility was inconvenient for pesticides, correct?
Yes, yes, that's correct.
Now, I do want to clarify on direct examination, you talked about how you saw many violations, but I do want to be clear, it wasn't improper storage violating the regulation on your 2018 examination, correct?
I'm sorry, say the question again.
So on your inspection in 2018, you found the storage facility inconvenient for pesticides, but it wasn't improper storage violating a violation, correct? Violating a regulation.
No, it wasn't.
All right, so you were only there 3 times for 3 inspections, correct?
That's correct.
You were there 3 times out of 3 years, right?
Yes.
So you only saw what happened on those 3 days that you were there. You weren't there any of the other 1,000 days or so that was in between those visits, correct?
Well, as I mentioned, we received an anonymous tip from my July 12th of 2018. So
right.
No, I was there on November 5th of 2015, July 12th of 2018, and May 8th of 2019.
But there's a 3-year gap between the 2015 inspection and the 2018, correct?
Yes.
And you don't know what happened between that gap, correct?
I don't, because I did not go and inspect again. But the July 12th of 2018 inspection was sent to us by an anonymous tip. Obviously, there was an issue.
The issue that you saw the one time that you visited, yes or no?
Yes, there was an issue, but
Right.
the letter, no, keep going. I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. I was just going to clarify that you did find the storage facility inconvenient for the pesticides, but as we stated, there was no direct violation of the regulation, correct?
No direct violation.
So that wine bottle that you saw you stated it could potentially create a health violation, but you never had it moved, correct?
I did. I told Kirby Doolittle to dispose of it immediately.
Right. But you yourself didn't remove it, correct?
No, I informed Kirby Doolittle that he needs to remove it from the shelf immediately and dispose of it.
Okay. And you sent samples that you took to the DHES laboratory, correct?
That is correct.
And all the samples contained acceptable levels of contaminants.
It was acceptable by FDA standards, but it was still an issue.
It was an issue, but that's your personal opinion. Am I right?
That would, based on my procedures, I have to go off FDA standards. From FDA standards, it was an acceptable amount, but it is still an issue. It was still a high concentration.
So is it your testimony here today that it was an issue, but it wasn't against the actual violations, correct?
They improperly stored pesticides on 3 occasions. I put them on probation, which gave them 3 chances to fix the issue, but I could never officially shut them down based on procedure of the of an FDA agent.
In your 2018 report, you said that my concern was the employees would use or store pesticides in an improper manner for convenience, which could potentially create a code violation. So it was a potential code violation, not a violation itself, correct?
Yes, as I stated, it is
Right.
was
And
not
it's
a
your
potential.
personal opinion that it was an issue, but it actually wasn't a rule regulation violation, correct?
Not by FDA standards, but as I mentioned, it was a high concentration. It is still a probable concern.
Did you put that concern within your report?
No.
For your final inspection, you went to the production area of Peony Estates, correct?
State your question again, I'm sorry.
Sorry, for your final inspection, May 8th, you went to the production area at Peony Estates, correct?
That's correct.
And you saw a bottle of wine sitting on the shelf.
Yes.
That was across from pesticides.
Yes.
And you said it was improper storage of pesticides on the shelf next to the bottle of wine.
That, and it was a beverage placed to a canister of pesticides. That's not sanitary. That's hazardous.
But you didn't confiscate that bottle, and you did, correct?
No, I did not confiscate it, but I did immediately tell Kirby Doolittle that he needs to dispose of it.
All right. And you didn't shut down the winery right there, correct?
No, because as I mentioned, it is a procedure as an FDA agent. You can't just shut down someone.
Now, you didn't think to take wine samples of the bottle of wine to see if it was contaminated or not, correct?
No, I did not take samples at that time.
And you didn't observe that bottle of Cara wine be bottled?
No, that's out of my, no.
So you can't say for certain that the Cara bottle of wine you saw had been contaminated, correct?
No, but it was a high probability considering that it was on a shelf next to pesticides.
You mentioned there were 4 violations, but you never visited the winery again.
That's correct.
So you don't know about any actions that were taken that the winery could have taken to remedy those violations, correct?
Nope, that's out of my scope of knowledge.
Miss Harper could have thrown away the bottle and you wouldn't have known.
I would not have known.
Because
Your
you
Honor,
never followed up.
Objection. This calls for speculation.
Your Honor, may I be heard?
Yes, ma'am.
It's not under the scope of speculation because she did not know whether or not it had been thrown away, but in direct examination, she talked as if she knew that there had been contaminants in the bottle and that she knew exactly what happened with it. I'm just confirming that she didn't know.
I had said I would allow some liberal cross-examination with respect to that bottle. I will allow that. I will overrule this objection. However, I will warn defense counsel not to use leading questions to assume facts that are not in evidence. I will allow you to sift this inspector on the scope of her knowledge, but I will entertain an objection assuming facts not in evidence if you go too far down that road. Do you understand my ruling?
Yes, Your Honor.
As to this limited question, I'll overrule the objection. Proceed.
So, Miss O'Keefe, Miss Harper could have thrown away that bottle of wine and you wouldn't have known, correct?
That's correct.
Because you never followed up.
No, I did not visit again.
Thank you. No further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you, ma'am. Do you wish to redirect this witness?
Briefly, Your Honor.
You may proceed.
Inspector O'Keefe, is it against the rules to store pesticides in wine bottling room in a wine bottling area?
Yes, it needs to be at least 50 feet away from all food and beverages.
Did they fix the storage? Did Peony Estates fix the storage issue following your first visit?
If you're referring to the July 12th of 2018, no.
And how about your second visit?
No, because I still found the same issue. There was still an issue with the storage of pesticides. It was still too close.
Thank you, Inspector O'Keefe. No further questions, Your Honor. We just ask that the witness be free to step down.
All right. Does everyone agree we can excuse this witness?
Yes, Your Honor.
Very well, Inspector. Thank you for your time. You are excused.
Thank you.
Is the plaintiff prepared to call its next witness?
Yes, Your Honor. Defense calls Lonnie Paris to the stand.
All right. Plaintiff's next witness may step down. Ms. Paris, you are under oath. You understand that?
Yes, Your Honor.
Very well. You may proceed.
Ms. Paris, can you see and hear me okay?
Yes, I sure can.
Could you please introduce yourself to the jury?
Yes. Hello, all. My name is Lonnie Paris. Sensei Pars Perez, but it's Paris.
What do you do for a living, Ms. Paris?
I'm an investigative journalist. That's what keeps the lights on.
And what brings you here today?
Well, I'd written an article and I investigated Peony Estates.
What prompted this investigation?
I'd received a tip from a competitor, Danny Francasio, who's the owner of Rosie and Pedro, and he notified me that Peony Estates might have had a pesticide issue.
Objection, Your Honor, as to hearsay to the statements of Danny Francasio, if I may be heard. Your Honor, this would be an exception under the hearsay exception for subsequent action. However, I believe they are trying to use the statement for the truth of the matter asserted rather than to show just solely subsequent action.
Response, please.
Your Honor, we're not offering this for the truth of the matter. This is just for context as to what prompted the investigation.
Your Honor, if I may. Oh, I'm sorry.
Just one moment, please. Is this the same topic that was discussed by the inspector earlier?
It is. Now, the tip can be true, it can be false. It won't affect the fact that this is what prompted the investigation. We'll see later in testimony whether or not it turned out to be true.
All right, I'll hear from the defense one more time.
Yes, Your Honor, I am fine with them talking about the statement in general as to Francasio gave them a tip that led to the investigation, but the statement in and of itself, I believe, is being used for the truth of the matter that Peony Estates did experience a pest problem, and therefore I believe they're trying to use this for the truth of the matter asserted.
I appreciate the objection. It's an intelligent one. However, I will overrule it, but I will give the jury a strict limiting instruction that this should not be considered in any way as the truth or for the truth of the matter asserted, merely to demonstrate the subsequent actions taken by the investigating inspector.
Yes, Your Honor.
Proceed.
Yes, Your Honor. Now, Ms. Paris, what did you do with this information?
Well, I couldn't just speculate. I had to actually investigate it. So I headed to Peony Estates to collect some information.
Let's talk about your visits to Peony Estates. When did you first go?
I first headed there on July 13th of 2018, the summer of 2018.
Did you find anything on that first visit?
Not anything substantial. I did come to find out that Peony Estates do have these guided tours, and they have them on Monday, Wednesdays, and Friday. So I decided to come back for one.
Okay, well, let's move on to that second visit when you came back from the tour. Did you find anything then?
Again, not that much. I did go on the tour and I learned a little bit about the winemaking process, the background of how wines are made. It wasn't until that I snuck into the back room, and only employees' back room, that I got to find some information. That's where I saw canisters of pesticides on the wine bottling shelf.
Did you find anything else?
Yes. I kind of got curious seeing all these bug off pesticide canisters laying around there that I ended up in Harper Martini's office, who's the owner of Peony Estates. That's where I saw a startling memo on her desk.
Could you please just restate what were the two things that you found?
I had found the bug off canisters on the wine bottling shelf area, and I had found a memo on Harper Martini's desk, a memo that was sent out from the head winemaker at Peony Estates.
If I showed you this memo, would you recognize it?
Of course.
Your Honor, permission to constructively display what has been marked as Exhibit 13 out of view of the jury before it is submitted.
Very well, you may do so. We will assume the jury cannot see the document, only the court and counsel and the witness.
Excuse me, Your Honor, I meant Exhibit 12. Now,
Record
Ms.
correct.
Paris, do you recognize this?
Yes, of course. This is the memo that I found on Harper Martini's desk.
Is it a fair and accurate copy?
Yes, it sure is.
Has it been altered in any way?
No, I don't believe it has.
Your Honor, the plaintiff offers Exhibit 12 into evidence.
Any objection?
Pursuant to the stipulations, the defense has no objection, Your Honor.
Thank you for clarifying. The court receives Exhibit 12 without objection pursuant to stipulation of the parties.
Ms. Paris, who sent out this memo?
Again, it was the head winemaker. The name is Austin Lewis, who's an employee, obviously, at Peony Estates.
And who did he send this memo out to?
It was sent out to all Peony Estates employees.
And what is the subject of this memo?
Message.
And when did he send this?
On July 1st of 2018.
Could I please have you read the second paragraph?
Of course. We need each and every one of you to prepare the entirety of Peony Estates for an imminent pesticide spraying. We need to do this quickly and cheaply. Nothing else matters. Would you like me to continue?
No need, Ms. Paris. I would like to go back to the actual tour itself. Did you learn anything on this guided tour?
Yes. I found out from the tour guide that Peony Estates uses a last year's wine to make, last year's grape to make the new wine of the year. So for example, if they have 2018 grapes, the 2018 grapes would be used for the 2019 wine. That's when I decided to postpone my investigation.
One more time, could you just clarify why exactly you postponed the investigation?
Of course. If the pesticides had been contained within the 2018 grapes, it wouldn't have been detected until the 2019 wine. That's why I decided to postpone. But in the meantime, I decided to read on the health codes, just the logistics of things to get my research substantial.
Over the next few following months, you went back for these intermittent visits to Peony Estates.
Yes.
On these intermittent visits, did you see anything important?
Yes. On May 8th, one of my visits, I did head to the back room, and that's where I saw this really pretty wine bottle. It was the 2019 Carol bottle. There was only one on like a wine bottling shelf.
Did you see anything else in the bottling area?
Yes. This was really the moment that I had made my big discovery on this story. This is where I saw just several empty cans of bug off pesticide containers in that same bottling shelf.
What did you do after you saw the pesticide containers?
Again, I can't just speculate. I need substantial information for my story. That's when I decided to take in a wine sample so I can get concrete evidence to see if there was pesticides in them.
Your Honor, I am now displaying what has been marked as Exhibit 11. This has been pre-admitted as per stipulation 4.
Very well.
Ms. Paris, do you recognize this?
Yes, I do. This was the test results I got from the laboratory.
And what did the test results say?
The test results ended up testing the sample positive for pesticides.
Now, did you see anything else curious the night of the wedding rehearsal?
Yes. So I'd been there at the rehearsal, and that's where I saw Harper Martini, the owner of Peony Estates, handing that 2019 bottle of wine to Genesis Petrillo, who I found out would be the fiance of her daughter.
Your Honor, I am now scrolling down to what has been marked as Exhibit 2A and 2B. These exhibits have been pre-admitted as per Stipulation 3.
Thank you, sir.
Ms. Paris, you recognize this?
Yes.
And what is it?
Like I said, this is the really pretty design of the Cara bottle wine, and that's the bottle right next to it.
Now, when was the first time that you saw this bottle?
I had seen it on the wine bottling shelf when I first entered, when I had gone to one of the back rooms at Peony Estates.
Objection, Your Honor, to speculation that this was the same bottle that Lonnie Paris had seen previously.
This was a similar objection we had with the first witness, and I do understand the objection. I'm going to go again and allow you liberal cross-examination with this witness as to the basis for her affirmative testimony under oath that she knows this to, in fact, be the bottle.
Yes, Your Honor.
Overruled at this time.
Ms. Paris, I would actually like to move forward a little bit before we continue with this bottle.
Of course.
And I would like to ask you a few questions about some retroactive investigations you took into Peony Estates. Could you please describe that process?
Yes. So after I headed out, and that's why I finally got all, the tests, the results of the sample, I decided to do further investigation. And that's where I decided to investigate into the Cara bottle wine and if it had been the only wine bottle produced at Peony Estates.
So you heard from a Peony Estates employee, what exactly?
Yes. So one of the Peony Estates employees who was willing to speak with me, which was quite rare, that Peony Estates only produced one Cara bottle wine, but they did have many in production, but it was all thrown out because of the incident of the poisoning.
Thank you. Your Honor, no further questions.
Cross-examination.
Yes, Your Honor.
You may proceed.
Yes. Ms. Paris, I wanted to talk about something that you stated on direct examination.
Of course.
Now, concerning your second visit to Peony Estates, that was July 16th, correct? Of 2008.
Yes, correct.
And
yes, correct.
stated on direct examination that you saw bottles of pesticides on a shelf in the bottling area. Is that correct?
I had seen it on the same room, right next to the bottling shelf.
But just to be clear, you didn't see the cans of pesticide on the shelf itself, did you?
No, it was in the same room, which was a bit startling to me.
They were scattered on the floor, is that correct?
Yes, they were.
All right. Now, you received a tip in 2016, isn't that correct?
Yes, I did.
And that tip was put in by Danny Francosio?
Yes, the owner of Rosie and Petra.
Correct. And that's a competitor of Peony Estates, isn't that correct?
Yes.
And Ms. Parrish, you didn't take that tip seriously at that time, did you?
No, I didn't. I mean, regardless of whether it was a competitor or not, that's how I usually get tips. But I decided to work on a different story.
Yes, but at that time in 2016, you did some research on Peony Estates, didn't you?
Yes, I did, briefly.
And it came up with internet searches, correct?
Yes.
And those internet searches did not show anything about someone becoming poisoned from Peony's wine, did it?
No, it didn't. And that's where I decided I shouldn't, follow up. But sometimes you need to do extra investigating. So it just depends on the story.
All right. Well, 2 years later in 2018, you decided to write about Peony again, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
And so you did some more research into Peony Estates, isn't that correct?
Yes.
And you still didn't find any information about people becoming sick from pesticides, is that correct?
No, I didn't. But again, that's what being an investigative journalist is all about. You have to, the best stories need the most work, unfortunately.
All right. Now I'd like to talk to you about the May 18th visit to Peony Estates, if that's all right.
May 8th?
Or I'm sorry, May 18th, 2019. My apologies. Was it May 8th you said?
Yes, I believe I headed there a few times.
Okay, so what about on, you went on a tour on July 16th, 2018, is that correct?
Yes, I sure did. That was my first time that I'd gone to one of the tours.
All right, then you continued going twice a month, isn't that right?
Yes, I went every so often. And in the meantime, when I didn't go, again, I still had read up on health codes and got my background information.
All right, now throughout the year of 2018, you did that. You continued to go to the winery, correct?
Yes.
And you went into the employees only area at this time, didn't you?
Yes, I did. That's a part of being, investigative journalist.
But throughout 2018, you never saw anything else out of the ordinary, did you?
Could you specify anything out of the ordinary?
You didn't see any canisters of pesticides lying around?
No, but I did end up seeing them later on.
But in 2018, you didn't see any pesticide containers lying around the facilities, did you?
No, I didn't. That's why I had to, keep following up.
All right, now I want to talk about your May visit in 2019 to Peonia Estates.
Okay.
And that day you went on another tour, correct?
Yes.
And as you had done in 2018, you went into the employees only area.
Yes.
And you entered the restricted area again, didn't you?
Right. That's the only way to get, again, substantial information for my story.
And again, at this time, you didn't see any pesticide canisters in the area, did you?
No, not at that time. Again, I had to keep following up to see where the story would lead.
In fact, the area was spotless, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. But like I said later on, it wouldn't have been that spotless.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit more. Later in 2019, you went back to the winery and you found an empty canister in the bottling area. Is that correct?
Yes, the Bug Off brand.
Well, you don't know for sure that was the Bug Off pesticide, do you?
Sorry, I don't really understand your question. Can you reiterate it?
Well, the bottle didn't have a label on it, did it?
No, it didn't. But Bug Off was such a common use of pesticides by Peonia Estates.
So it would be correct to say that you assumed that it was the Bug Off pesticide?
I mean, it's just common sense.
That an empty bottle with no label on it is Bug Off pesticide, that's common sense?
Well, it had the same label. So basically all the canisters do look alike. And I did see the label of Bug Off pesticides.
The label wasn't on the canister, was it, Ms. Paris?
No, it wasn't. But I'd seen how a Bug Off canister looks like.
All right, Ms. Paris, no further questions, Your Honor.
Will there be any redirect?
No redirect, Your Honor.
May we excuse this witness?
You may excuse him.
Very well. You may step down, ma'am. Any further evidence from the plaintiff?
Yes, Your Honor. The plaintiff calls Dr. Jimmy Kwan.
Very well. Ms. Kwan, come on down to the stand. You understand you're under oath?
Yes.
You may proceed.
Yes, Your Honor. Please introduce yourself to the court.
My name is Dr. Jimmy Kwan.
Dr. Kwan, what do you do for a living?
For the past 5 years, I've been the chief emergency physician at River Valley Hospital in Midlands.
And where did you go to school?
Oh, I received my undergrad at Georgia Tech, my medical degree from UNC, and I did my residency and fellowship at Emory University Hospital.
And did you specialize in any particular field?
Yes, I specialized in emergency medicine and medical toxicology. As a boy, I was attached to my mother's hip, Southern Mama's boy. Unfortunately, she battled breast cancer. I spent my whole childhood in the hospital, quickly became the hallway greeter, learned a thing or two about bedside manner. While she did beat the cancer and go into remission, she passed away when I was a teen, not due to the cancer, but due to the lifetime complications of the toxins within chemotherapy. This started my passion for toxicology. My mama wasn't able to be saved, so I try to save others.
Now, for those of us who aren't too familiar, could you explain to us what exactly is toxicology, Dr. Kwan?
Yeah, it's the study of harmful effects of chemical substances on living organisms.
And what specific training do you have in your area of medicine?
I completed my residency in emergency medicine in 2001 at Emory. And then 2 years later, I completed my fellowship specifying medical toxicology.
And what licenses and certifications do you have?
I've had my medical license for going on 17 years now. I'm certified in internal medicine, critical care, emergency medicine, and medical toxicology.
Your Honor, permission to display Exhibit 20, which is Dr. Kwan's curriculum vitae. We can go through the proper steps of admitting it into evidence before the jury is allowed to see it.
Very well. We will constructively view the exhibit as you lay the foundation.
Yes. Thank you. Can you identify this document before you, Dr. Kwan?
Yes, that is the CV I wrote for myself.
And is it a fair and accurate copy as you remember it to be?
Most certainly.
Your Honor, at this time, plaintiff offers Exhibit 20 into evidence.
Is there any objection to the CV?
No objection, Your Honor.
Court receives it without objection. You may proceed.
Yes, Your Honor. Now, according to this document, it states that you have multiple published journals. Could you tell us about a few of those that relate to the work that you were asked to do in today's case?
Oh, most certainly. I have 5 that relate to the case, I believe. 1 on testing delays, 2 on poisons and pesticides, 2 on the diagnostic process that goes into the cases. I also run my own blog.
Okay, and please describe your duties currently as chief emergency physician.
My current duties would be diagnosing and treating patients who come into the ER, especially those who have been exposed to toxins. I also manage a very large team of nurses and physicians in the ER room.
Now, what brings you here today?
Well, unfortunately, on June 7th, 2019, Genesis Petrillo was admitted to the emergency room where I was the physician in charge that evening. I treated his symptoms and diagnosed his illness. I was asked to prepare a report offering a conclusion on the illness and symptoms and how they were caused.
Well, Dr. Kwan, before we get into those conclusions, could you briefly describe to the court the events that you witnessed on that evening?
Yes, when Petrillo first entered, he was vomiting and non-responsive. He smelled of wine and appeared to be intoxicated. He showed signs that were consistent with alcohol poisoning. So from this, I conducted a full examination.
And what did that examination entail?
I took samples of blood, vomit, and examined his systems and vitals.
Now, during this examination, can you explain to us, what did you observe?
Yes, I observed symptoms that made you believe that he was experiencing something other than what initially appeared to be alcohol poisoning. Petrillo's excessive tearing, contracted pupils, rapid pulse were all very inconsistent with alcohol poisoning.
And what did that tell you?
To be specific, his pupils showed me that there's a good chance that he was exposed to a particular toxin called organophosphate. This led me to order a full panel of a poison and toxins analysis.
Well, before we get to that analysis, can you tell us what are some of the different ways one can become poisoned by organophosphate?
Yes, there are a couple. There's inhalation, like breathing, absorption through the skin, and ingestion, eating or drinking something. Genesis showed no sign of inhalation or absorption, so I concluded that it was through ingestion.
Now, previously you mentioned you ordered samples of Genesis blood and vomit. Can you explain to the court the tests that were performed on those samples?
Yes, I did 2 tests. We tested the blood and the stomach contents for the poison.
Did you have sufficient facts and data to perform these tests?
Yes, most definitely.
And were the methods used to conduct these tests relied upon by other professionals in your field?
Most certainly.
Now, Dr. Kwan, I want to talk about each of these tests separately. First, your toxicology screening. Explain to us, what exactly is that?
It's a standard analysis that tested Genesis's blood for the presence of toxins.
And what did the analysis show for Genesis?
It showed that Genesis had a blood alcohol level of 0.16, which confirmed that he had been drinking.
Now, Dr. Kwan, can you please explain the relevance of the blood alcohol content as it relates to the work that you were asked to do in today's case?
I prepared a chart that can help us with that. It's the alcohol impairment chart that should be an exhibit.
Your Honor, permission to display Exhibit 23. We can go through the same proper steps of admitting it before the jury is allowed to see it.
Very well. We will constructively view the exhibit while you lay the foundation.
Can you identify the document before you?
Yes, this is the Midlands alcohol impairment chart.
And is it a fair and accurate copy as you remember it to be?
It is indeed.
Your Honor, at this time, plaintiff offers Exhibit 23 into evidence.
Does the defense object?
No objection, Your Honor.
Thank you,
Dr.
ma'am. Court receives Exhibit 23 without objection. You may proceed.
Yes, Your Honor. Dr. Kwan, can you explain the relevance of blood alcohol content as it relates to the work that you did in today's case?
Yes, Genesis's BAC was a 0.16. That did not put him at risk of death. He would need at least a 0.30 BAC to be at risk of death.
Now, were you able to confirm how this poison got into Genesis' system?
Yes, I was. I was able to conduct a test that tested the stomach contents, and it's tested that you could separate the food from the wine, and that the alcohol. I'm sorry, can you rephrase your question?
Well, I was asking, were you able to confirm how this poison got into Genesis' system?
Yes, from the stomach contents that included the wine that he had been drinking.
Now, you mentioned that he took tests of the vomit. Can you explain to us that test and the results of those tests?
Yes, the test of the vomit had both wine in it and food contents. The food contents contained no organophosphate, but the wine did.
At this point, did you have sufficient facts and data to create your report?
Yes, I did. It was standard testing.
And were the methods used accepted and relied upon by those in your field?
Yes,
Did you reliably apply those methods and principles to the facts in today's case?
I did.
What did Genesis Petrillo ingest that contained this poison?
The wine.
And did you consider any other alternatives as to what he might have ingested?
No, because there were only what was in his stomach, what was in his stomach.
Now, is there any other reason Genesis would experience these symptoms?
Not from my knowledge.
Did I understand that time is run?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, counsel, you'll have to wrap up then. Is there a cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor. May I proceed?
You may.
Dr. Kwan, I want to start off with something interesting that you said on direct examination. You said that you took samples of Genesis Petrillo's blood and vomit. Is that correct?
Yes.
Is it your testimony today that you took samples of Genesis Petrillo's blood?
Yes.
Would you prepared a report for today's case? Is that correct?
I did.
And you would recognize that report if I showed it to you here in court today?
Yes.
Your Honor, permission to screen share Dr. Kwan's report?
You may.
Dr. Kwan, please read silently as I read aloud lines 134 to 137. The results from testing Petrillo's vomit showed that Petrillo had indeed ingested wine. And Petrillo's blood alcohol level was 16%, which corroborates that Petrillo had been drinking. Importantly, the wine tested from Petrillo's stomach contents contained organophosphate pesticide. Did I read that correctly?
Yes, which is what I have previously said.
But Dr. Kwan, you did not collect samples of Genesis Petrillo's blood.
It says that I performed a blood test, so I'm not. That's what that medically means. If there is 0.1.
Dr. Kwan, let me help you clarify. It says in your report that Petrillo's vomit showed that Petrillo had ingested wine. Is that correct? That's what it says?
Yes.
It doesn't say that testing Petrillo's blood showed that Petrillo had indeed ingested wine. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. But upon anyone entering the ER, you take common vitals. Taking blood samples is a very common vital. I'm not sure if that is relevant to what you're asking, but that is something that was performed.
Dr. Kwan, you did not take Genesis Petrillo's blood in a standard blood work panel, correct? You only tested Genesis Petrillo's blood when you performed a toxicology test.
Yes.
You did not perform a standard blood work panel.
No.
Thank you, Dr. Kwan. It was your job today to analyze the symptoms of Genesis Petrillo.
Correct.
It was your job to diagnose him.
Correct.
Let's talk about your conclusion. When you decided that pesticide poisoning is what killed Genesis Petrillo.
Yes.
Let's talk about what you did not consider. You don't know for certain if Genesis Petrillo had alcohol poisoning.
I can be most certain that he did not.
Well, Dr. Kwan, you don't know how many drinks he had that night?
No.
You don't know when he had his last drink?
I can tell you it was hours prior, considering he was at the hospital unconscious. So, well, incontinent and then unconscious. So he definitely wouldn't have been drinking during that time.
Is that a yes? You do not know when he had his last drink?
That question would have to be a yes and a no, because I do have a time frame reference, but I don't know in exact.
Dr. Kwan, you weren't there, were you?
No, I did not receive an invitation to the wedding.
Objection, Your Honor.
Grounds?
May I be heard?
Briefly.
Yes, needlessly cumulative pursuant to Rule 403. It's already been understood that Dr. Kwan was the doctor who treated Petrillo on the evening. It's already understood and that Dr. Kwan was not with Genesis. And so any further questions that are designed to highlight what Dr. Kwan did or did not see before are needlessly cumulative.
Overruled.
Dr. Kwan, are you ready to continue?
Yes.
You didn't perform an autopsy on Genesis Petrillo either.
No, the family had requested he be immediately cremated. The family has to specify whether or not they.
Is that a no? You did not perform is that a
No.
yes? You did not perform an autopsy?
That is a no, I did not.
After assessing Genesis Petrillo's symptoms, you only ran a toxicology report.
I did much more than that. I mean, you have to constantly monitor vitals. You have to check for signs and symptoms. I did more than
Dr.
just
Kwan, you had test data from the toxicology report.
Yes, but I did much more than that in a short time frame, because the atmosphere of an ER is a lot more
And
complex.
you only had test data on pesticides.
I had test data on multiple things, not just pesticides.
You found that pesticides caused Genesis Petrillo's death.
Yes, from my years and years of knowledge and medical expertise, and from the atmosphere I had to quickly work in a life or death situation in the ER, from the information gathered and my medical background, I have concluded that the only cause of death could be organophosphate pesticides.
I have time.
That was my last question, Your Honor.
Very well. Is there some redirect for the witness, or is that not permitted if time is run? Is additional time permitted?
No, Your Honor.
All right, then we'll ask this witness to step down. Doctor, thank you for your time. You'll be excused. Will there be any further evidence from the plaintiff?
No, Your Honor, the plaintiff rests his case in chief.
Very well. Before we proceed with the defense case in chief, would the parties like to take a 5-minute recess?
That's fine, Your Honor.
That's fine with us, Your Honor.
All right, very well. My clock has us at 11:17. Let's take a 5-minute recess, try to get back here about 11:22, 11:23, please.
Hey, Mark, this is Chris. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir, I can.
Hey, I had a question from one of the timekeepers, and so that everyone has the answer to that question, because I asked Elliot and Scott on it, I'm going to relay that question and then also the answer once everyone's back, if that works well for you.
Yeah, that's fine. Is there something I need to do to correct something in the trial?
Oh, I don't think so. But because I think that it would have applied universally, so I think everything's okay.
All right.
Your Honor, all the defense is back and ready to proceed whenever you are ready.
The plaintiff is ready to proceed as well.
All right. I understand from one of my co-judges that a question was raised regarding timekeeping. Judge Fleury, did you want to clarify that?
Absolutely. Thank you, Judge. The question was raised as to when and whether to pause timekeeping during objections. And the answer to that question is as soon as the objection is raised, time should be paused, and it should remain paused until the judge has provided his or her ruling on that objection.
All right. I will ask the timekeepers, does anyone believe that there was an error in the timekeeping with that clarification?
My question was more so to the admitting evidence that's not pre-admitted.
I understand. My understanding, and please clarify this for me before we proceed. My understanding is that while objections pause time, laying foundations of exhibits would not, because that is part and parcel of the actual direct or cross.
That would be my understanding as well, unless there was an objection raised to the exhibit.
Precisely. All right. Any further matters we need to take up before we proceed with the defense case in chief? All right. Hearing none, is the defense prepared to call its first witness?
Yes, Your Honor. The defense would call Danny Francasio to the stand.
All right. Mr. Francasio, thank you for being here today. You're under oath. You understand, sir?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right. You may proceed.
Your Honor, please introduce yourself to the jury.
Good morning. My name is Danny Francasio.
Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Certainly. I make wine for a living. I've owned and operated my own winery, Rosie and Pedro's, for the past 15 years.
All right, and how are you involved in today's case?
Well, I'm testifying on behalf of my former friend and co-worker, Harper Martini, who owns my biggest competition in Midlands, Peony Estates.
Now, how did you come to own your winery, Rosie and Pedro?
Well, after I earned my MBA from Duke, I went on a cross-country road trip, and when I got to Midlands, I came across this winery called Cumberland's Farm. I talked with the owner and found out that he was considering putting it up for sale, so I seized on the opportunity and I bought it. And after I purchased Rosie and Pedro, I decided that the new ownership needed a new name, so I went with Rosie and Pedro, named after my two rescue dogs, Rosie, my Maltese, and Pedro, my Chihuahua.
All right, now, what all goes into running a winery?
Well, I like to call it the 4 Ps. You got to start off with the 4 Ps. You have to pick, process, press the grapes, and then you have to pour them into steel tanks. And while they're in these tanks, you have to add yeast. And then after waiting about 2 or 3 weeks, you transfer the wine from these tanks into wooden barrels, and you leave them to age anywhere between a few weeks or months to a few years. And while they're aging, you have to intermittently test this wine to make sure there aren't any contaminants.
All right, well, that sounds like a lot. How many people do you typically need on your staff to conduct these operations?
Anywhere from about 6 to 10 staff members. This is actually how I came to know Harper Martini.
All right, well, what did Mr. Martini do for you?
Well, I hired her as a cellar hand in 2012, and one of her main responsibilities was to make sure that the cellar area where the aging wine was stored was free and clear of any pests. And if she saw any, she was to immediately notify me.
All right, now what other positions did Martini work for you in?
Well, in 2014, after her stellar work, I promoted her to vineyard manager, where she impressed me even more.
All right, now you described a little bit about your professional relationship, but would you mind explaining what your personal relationship with Harper Martini was like?
Well, besides my fur babies, Harper and her daughter Casey were really the only family I had.
All right, now how long did you employ Harper Martini for?
For 3 years.
And what was your relationship like after Harper left?
In January of 2015, Harper told me that she had bought another winery in Midlands, and she wouldn't be working at Rosie and Pedro's anymore. And if I'm being really honest, I was really hurt. I just wanted to get back at her for the first few years after it happened and cause her the same pain that she caused me, but eventually I came to accept it.
All right, now what about your relationship with Miss Martini's daughter, Casey?
Well, even though with my relationship with Harper really deteriorated, it was like losing the yin to my yang. My relationship with Casey stayed pretty much the same. It was as good as ever.
All right, now I want to talk a little bit about Peony Estates. What do you know about Peony Estates' reputation?
From what I could tell, they were doing better than Rosie and Pedro, so much so that I started seeing a decline in profits at Rosie and Pedro's for the first few years after Peony Estates started business.
Well, what do you mean by that?
Less people started choosing to host their weddings at Rosie and Pedro's since we didn't have an accompanying bed and breakfast. And business was down to the point where I had to take a pay cut so that I didn't have to implement any layoffs.
Well, what, if any, knowledge do you have of clients becoming sick from Peony Estates wine?
Unfortunately, the only person that I know of getting sick from Peony Estates is Genesis Petrillo. She's the only person that I know of that's gotten sick in the 4 years that Peony Estates has been in business.
All right, thank you, Mr. Francosio. I have no further questions at this time, Your Honor.
Thank you, counsel. Cross-examination.
Yes, Your Honor. Before I begin cross-examination, there are several exhibits which we need to administer during this. Now, we're happy to go through the proper steps of admittance for this evidence, but we would ask that we assume beforehand that before they are admitted, they are all out of view of the jury.
If you're asking simply for a housekeeping matter that you're constructively showing them and not showing them to the jury during foundation, that is granted.
Yes, Your Honor. We're ready to proceed.
You may.
Now, Mr. Francosio, you hired Harper Martini in 2012 to be a cellar hand.
I did.
Was it part of Harper's job to ensure that the wine cellar was free of pests?
Yes, as cellar hand, one of her main duties was to make sure that the cellar was free and clear of any pests.
It was also Harper Martini's job to seal off barrels before using pesticides.
Yes, she was to notify me when she saw any pests so that we could seal off these barrels before spraying.
And you had told Harper Martini that exposing wine to pesticides is worse than exposing it to the pest.
Yes, it could very well be worse than exposing people to the pests themselves.
Is it true that during Harper Martini's tenure at Rosie and Pedro, they would have done this multiple times?
Yes, 5 or 6 in the 3 years she worked for me.
And it is also true that when Harper Martini was working at Rosie and Pedro, as well as presently, the Rosie and Pedro keeps their pesticide in storage sheds far away from the grapes and the wine.
Yes, you know how in the storybooks they say, once upon a time in a land far, far away. I like to call it my storage shed far, far away at the corner of the property.
Oh, that's right. And that's because this is not only common sense, but it's also the law.
Yes, you're supposed to keep the storage area away from the cellar.
I would like to move on a little bit more to proper licensing. A pesticide storage training is part of the course to get a liquor license in Midlands.
Yes.
And Harper Martini, who you hired and trained, would not only have had proper pesticide training, but they would have had pesticide training to get their liquor license.
Objection, Your Honor, to speculation. As to
Allow
whether-
the witness to testify if he knows on his own personal knowledge. Overruled at this time. If the answer reveals that he did not, then I'll hear another objection. Proceed.
I'll re-ask the question. You had, as Mr. Martini's boss, you had instructed them to receive training in order to get a proper liquor license.
Yes, that's right.
Now, I am now going to show you what has been marked as Exhibit 13. Can we please have Exhibit 13 displayed? One moment.
That's all right. You're experiencing some technical difficulties.
There we go. Thank you. And Mr. Francasi, do you recognize Exhibit 13?
Yes, I do.
And what is it?
This appears to be an email that Harper Martini sent to me in 2016.
Is it a fair and accurate copy of that email?
It is.
Your Honor, the plaintiff offers Exhibit 13 to evidence.
Do I have
Your
an
Honor.
objection from the defense?
Yes, Your Honor. I would object to relevance if I may be heard.
Yes, but let me ask a first question. If the plaintiff has closed their case in chief, do the local rules permit the plaintiff to offer further evidence?
Yes, Your Honor, it does.
All right, then I'll hear your substantive objection.
Yes, Your Honor. Now, the negligence per se case, specifically the negligence per se claim, has nothing to do with the knowledge of Harper Martini as to the procedures and storage of pesticides. It only has to do with whether or not Peonia Estates actually properly followed these procedures. Now, a negligence claim would include knowledge, but negligence per se is just the violation in and of itself. These emails will only go to show whether or not Harper Martini had knowledge of these procedures, not as to whether or not she actually followed them, and therefore it's not relevant in today's case.
I'll hear from the plaintiff.
Your Honor, in order to properly assess whether or not Peonia Estates violated the rules, it makes sense to make sure that the head of the company is aware of proper procedures.
So essentially the argument that in order to sift whether or not they can follow the rules, got to prove whether they even know they exist.
Correct.
Very well. I'll overrule the objection at this time, but we'll note it for the record, please. You may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Now, Mr. Francasio, what is the subject of this email?
The subject reads pesky pests.
This was the first email in a long line of emails that you received from Harper Martini.
Yes, it is.
Now, in this email, does Harper Martini say there are pests inside of Peonia Estates?
Yes, she does. But this is, I didn't respond to this email because at the time it was sent to me, I was really hurt, and I just figured that Harper was trying to strike up a conversation to rekindle our friendship. I was having none of it, though.
That may very well be. Can we please display Exhibit 14 at this time? We ask again for a moment of patience as we deal with the technical difficulties.
That's all right. I am going to allow a little leeway on time since you're having these technical difficulties.
Now, resuming, Mr. Francasio, excuse me, you recognize Exhibit 14?
I do.
Is it a fair and accurate copy?
It is.
Your Honor, plaintiff offers Exhibit 14 into evidence.
Any objection?
Pursuant to your prior ruling, the defense has no objection, Your Honor.
Very well. Thank you, ma'am. We'll proceed.
Now, Mr. Francasio, I'll skip directly to the substance of this email. Now, in this email, again, Harper Martini is asking you for help with the pest problem.
That's what it says, yes. But once again, I figured that she was trying to just start up a conversation again. It had been a year since it felt like she stabbed me in the back. And I honestly, the only reason I responded is just in case.
Very well. However, when you responded, you were reminding her again that the most important thing is to make sure that there was no wine inside the cellar.
Yes, just in case.
That's a yes to my question, sir. I'll move on. You also warned Harper that improper pesticide usage can kill someone.
It can, yes, but she already knew that.
Moving on towards Exhibit 17. And again, we ask that the time may be paused to reflect any technical difficulties.
Which exhibit is needed?
17. And to your honor and to the judges, if we need to move things along, we're happy to do so.
I'll leave that in your
sorry.
discretion. Since you're having technical difficulties, I'll ask the timekeeper to please add 2 minutes to the time. I believe that's about what we've lost trying to get these exhibits up. So you may proceed, counsel.
Thank you, your honor. Now, Mr. Francasio, do you recognize Exhibit 17?
I do, but okay. Yeah, I was about to say, I think that's only one page of the exhibit.
We're happy to scroll along through the exhibit, but you do recognize the exhibit.
I do.
And as we scroll through it, it appears to be a fair and accurate copy.
Yes.
Plaintiff offers Exhibit 17 to evidence.
Any objection?
Yes, Your Honor, only to the statements made by Danny Francasio as they are hearsay.
Are you making a motion to redact the exhibit in part?
Yes, Your Honor, if we could just redact Danny Francasio's statements, I would be fine with that.
I hear from the plaintiff on this issue.
Your Honor, pursuant to Rule 803(5)(c), these records reflect witness knowledge. They should not qualify as hearsay.
I'm sorry, you got over talked there by something in the background. Could you say that one more time, sir?
Pursuant to Rule 803(5)(c), these are records of witness knowledge. They do not qualify as hearsay, or they are accepted hearsay.
Your Honor, if
Yes,
I may.
ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
They would be an exception to hearsay if they weren't being used for the truth of the matter asserted, but I believe that these statements are being used for the truth of the matter and to show that Danny Francasio did say these things in a truthful manner to Harper Martini and that the statements were made and are being used for their truth value.
All right, I'm going to treat this the same way I treated a similar issue earlier in the case. I will overrule the objection. However, we will give a very stern limiting instruction to the jury regarding the use of the statements by Mr. Francasio for the purposes of the truth or not the truth. Very well, proceed.
Mr. Francasio, in this email, Harper Martini informed you that Peony Estates failed an FDA inspection.
Yes, that's what she said.
Now, in the email sent at 12:45 p.m., did Harper Martini inform you on what Peony Estates failed on specifically?
Could you scroll to that specific email so that I can read it, please? She did.
And now Harper said, or excuse me, did Peony Estates fail to meet safety standards for pesticide storage?
Yes, that's what she said, but I have no way of 100% knowing whether or not that's what really happened.
In your reply to that email, did you tell Harper to halt all sales of wine?
I did.
Did you tell Harper to make sure that all pesticides were kept far away?
That's what I told her, yes.
Thank you. No further questions, Your Honor.
All right, cross-examination. Excuse me. Next exam.
No redirect, Your Honor. I just asked that Mr. Francasio be excused.
Yes, sorry. Judge's brain got fried there a minute, folks. It happens in real life too, trust me. All right, may the witness step down, please. All right, you prepared to call your next witness?
Yes, Your Honor. The defense would like to call Mr. Austin Lewis to the stand.
All right, Mr. Lewis, come on down to the stand. You understand you're under oath? Ah, it's Ms.
Mr.
There it is. I
yes,
just couldn't see you. All right, you may proceed.
Please introduce yourself to the jury.
My name is Austin Lewis.
And can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, I make wine for a living, following in my mother's footsteps. I work at Peony Estates in the Midlands Winery.
How'd you get the job at Peony Estates?
Well, I was offered the job by a close friend of mine, Harper Martini, while we were both working at Rosie and Pedro, another winery in the area.
What was your experience working at Rosie and Pedro?
Well, I grew up on that winery. My mother worked there, and unfortunately, she passed away. But Danny Francasio, the owner of Rosie and Pedro, offered me her old job, and I accepted. And I worked there from 2012 to about 2015.
How did you meet Harper Martini?
Well, we were both into winemaking, I guess. We kind of quickly hit it off when we became co-workers at Rosie and Pedro. So when she offered me the job as lead winemaker at this new place, Peony Estates, that she was starting, I accepted on the spot.
And what did you do as the head winemaker at Peony?
Well, I oversaw growth, fermentation, really anything that involved the wine, I was involved with. Harper handled more of the business of the winery. I was more the artist, the hands-on guy.
What was it like in the beginning of Peony Estates?
Well, Peony Estates bordered the Silove Swamp. So while the soil was great, we had a serious bug problem.
What methods did you try to use to get rid of the bug problem at Peony?
Well, we started trying to use organic pesticides, but they really weren't working and they costed too much. So in October 2015, we switched to chemical pesticides.
Can you discuss the proper pesticide usage process at the winery?
Well, before spraying anywhere, we would empty the area of any wine or wine precursors. We would shut down and remove any equipment. If the equipment couldn't be removed, we would plastic wrap the equipment and we would spray it and leave it untouched for 48 hours before moving all the equipment back in. And obviously after spraying, we washed our hands thoroughly and changed into fresh clothes before coming into contact with the wine.
Now, who sprays for pesticides at Peony Estates?
Well, Peony Estates employees do, and Harper put me in charge of the training, so I'll train the employees on the proper procedures for using pesticides, and only a qualified employee or myself is allowed to do the sprayings.
How did you train the employees for pesticide spraying?
Well, every year since about 2015, I went through the proper procedures with all of my employees, and I also I put up signs around the property to remind them of the basic procedures as well.
What was the purpose of these safety measures?
Well, safety, to be honest with you. We didn't want to have any chance for our wine to come in contact with those pesticides.
How effective was your pest control?
Well, since the start of Peony Estates, we have had to regularly spray pesticides, and at no point during that process have any of our bottles ever become contaminated.
Now, I want to talk to you about the health code violations. Can you tell me about the violation that you were cited for in 2018? What was that?
Well, we had developed a pretty bad roach and mite problem in the bottling area in the wine cave. And on the day that we were going to go in and spray for that, the inspector came in and cited us for having pesticide stored in a nearby shed.
What steps did you take to correct that issue?
Well, Miss O'Keefe told us that the shed that we had been previously using for the pesticide storage was too far away from the wine area, and we couldn't rely on our employees to use it. So we constructed a new facility, a new shed, about 600 feet away at the proper distance from the wine production facility so that our employees would be able to store the pesticides in a closer destination.
When did the second violation occur?
In May 2019, we developed another pretty bad mite problem in the bottling area. And on May 8th, again, on the day we were going to spray, the inspector came and cited us.
And what was that?
Well, we had moved the spraying materials into the production area before moving the bottles out and wrapping the equipment. And even though having the pesticide in an active production area is a health code violation, we allowed that to happen. It was a mistake. We were supposed to move the bottles out and spray, but there was a problem with the drain, and we acknowledged that.
And how did you correct it?
Well, we had a plumber come in and fix the drain. I increased my personal vigilance about pesticide storage practices, and I put up signs to remind all of our employees about the basic health procedures.
Finally, I want to talk about the 2019 wine produced by Peony Estates. Can you tell the jury what that wine was?
Well, Peony Estates is a boutique winery, so we produce signature wines each year. And 2019, that signature wine was Cara.
And as an employee at Peony in charge of the pesticide usage, how did you know that no bottles of the wine were actually contaminated?
Well, I'm the lead winemaker at Peony Estates, and my close friend Harper Martini is the owner. So if one of our bottles was ever contaminated and led to somebody becoming deathly ill, I would have heard about it.
Thank you. Your Honor, I have no further questions at the moment.
Very well. Cross-examination.
Yes, Your Honor.
You may proceed.
Good morning, Mr. Lewis. Your family worked at Cumberland's Farm Winery, correct?
Yes, ma'am. My mother did.
You also worked at Rosie and Pedro Winery, correct?
Well, it was the same winery, yes, ma'am. But it just changed the name, kind of like when the Charlotte Bobcats changed to the Hornets. Same disappointing basketball team, just a different title.
You currently work at Peony Estates, correct?
Yes, ma'am. I'm the lead winemaker.
In fact, you own a part of the company Peony Estates.
Yes, ma'am. I own 10%.
So you're very experienced at winemaking.
I would say so.
And you're very knowledgeable on all the rules and federal regulations that come with the winemaking business.
Yes, ma'am.
And one of your jobs is to manage the employees of Peony Estates.
Yes. And as I said, it was my job to actually train and inform our employees about all those proper procedures you just mentioned.
And one of your main responsibilities was to oversee all pesticide spraying.
Yes, ma'am.
So you allowed your employees to improperly store pesticides on at least 3 occasions?
Oh, no, not at all. I mean, those were mistakes. Let me emphasize.
You were cited for improper storage of pesticides in November
Objection,
2015,
Your Honor.
correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Plaintiff did not let my client answer the question that she asked beforehand.
I saw that. Please do allow the witness to finish his answer. Mr. Lewis, if you need to finish your answer to the prior question, please do so.
My apologies. Please continue.
Well, as I was saying, I acknowledge that our employees made mistakes and they violated those health code procedures, but I was not allowing them to do so. And after they did those, I made an effort to correct those issues.
Yes, Mr. Lewis. You were cited for improper storage of pesticides in November 2015, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And again in mid-July of 2018?
Yes, 3 years later.
And again in May 2019, a year later from the 2018 incident?
Yes.
And you had a disagreement with Martini concerning the reteaching of proper protocols, correct?
Yes, Harper Martini said that it was too costly for us to provide our employees with additional training. We still train our employees and plan on training them every year as the required annual training, but the additional training Harper thought was too costly.
And you came to the conclusion not to retrain the employees on proper storage protocols, correct?
Yes, Harper decided it would be too expensive.
In fact, Harper Martini forbade you from retraining the employees.
Well, yes, she said I could not.
Let's move on for a minute. An employee got very sick in 2018 from contaminated wine, correct?
Yes, an employee got sick from a personal glass of wine that they left out in a pesticide spraying.
And that wine was contaminated with pesticide?
Well, it was a glass of wine. And so when we sprayed for pesticides, yes, it became contaminated.
The employee got so sick they almost died.
That's
correct?
what Harper told me. Yes, ma'am.
But you were not present when this incident occurred, correct?
No, I was not.
You just testified that you personally oversaw all pesticide spraying, correct?
Well, yes, I was not present, I'm sorry, when this employee got sick. I was present at that pesticide spraying.
The pesticide spraying that contaminated the glass of wine that led to the employee getting sick, correct?
Yes.
Let's move on to the type of pesticide you use. Previously, it was an organic pesticide, correct?
Yes, as I said, in the first few months of Peony Estate's existence, we tried to use organic pesticides.
But Peony Estates changed to chemical pesticides.
Well, yes, because the organic pesticides we had been using were just cost ineffective and they really weren't stopping the bugs.
And it, like you said, it was due mostly because it was hemorrhaging money, correct?
Yes, we were losing money. It was too expensive.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Would be any redirect?
No, Your Honor. I just asked that Mr. Lewis be able to step down.
All right, Mr. Lewis, you are excused. Court thanks you for your time.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Another witness for the defense?
Yes, Your Honor. The defense calls Dr. Remington Cannon to the stand.
All right, Dr. Cannon. You understand you're under oath?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, you may proceed.
Please introduce yourself to the jury.
Hello, my name is Dr. Remington Cannon.
Dr. Cannon, what do you do for a living?
Well, currently I work as an associate consultant for Gardner Consulting Incorporated. There, my job is to assess and analyze the actions and conclusions made by medical professionals that are being used in court cases. In my free time, I also have professional affiliations that are a part of my field.
Dr. Cannon, can you tell us a little about your educational background?
Sure. I received my undergraduate degree in chemistry from Ohio State, and then I went on to graduate from Harvard's medical school with an emphasis in toxicology.
What did you do after leaving medical school?
After leaving medical school, I became the chief toxicologist at Massachusetts General Hospital in Boston before taking a faculty position at Midlands Medical School, where I taught courses in toxicology. During my career, I have also published over 50 articles in toxicology, medicine, and treatment.
Dr. Cannon, why are you here today?
I was hired by the defense to assess Dr. Kwan's findings in the death of Genesis Petrillo.
How did you begin that analysis?
Well, I began by reviewing the materials that were made available to me about the case before really diving into Dr. Kwan's conclusions.
Can you tell the jury what materials you reviewed in preparation for trial today?
Sure. The documents I had available to me were Dr. Kwan's official report, the affidavit of Angel Rodriguez, Genesis Petrillo's toxicology and lab test reports, Genesis Petrillo's death certificate, the analytical report of Genesis Petrillo's Cara wine bottle, and an alcohol impairment chart.
Dr. Cannon, did you review an autopsy for today's case?
No, strangely, to my knowledge, Dr. Kwan did not order an autopsy, so there was no report for me to review.
And what method did you follow to analyze Dr. Kwan's findings?
Well, after I reviewed the materials that were made available to me, I began to compare Dr. Kwan's method of examination with our standard emergency medical protocols, and then I analyzed the accuracy of Dr. Kwan's conclusions. I, of course, applied these methods reliably and in accordance with the standards in my field. Emergency rooms are extremely hectic places, and so it's important that we make sure that proper protocols are being followed in these crazy situations.
Thank you, Dr. Cannon. Let's talk about what Dr. Kwan found. What were her conclusions?
Dr. Kwan found that it was most likely that Genesis petrillo was poisoned by an organophosphate pesticide. She also said that this poison most likely came from a wine bottle that was ingested, the wine was ingested on June 7th. Unfortunately, in my analysis of this case, I determined that the answer was not that simple.
Dr. Cannon, what do you mean it was not that simple?
While I would agree that there are certainly facts in this case that are consistent with organophosphate pesticide poisoning through laced wine, there are several alternatives that cannot be ruled out, some of which it appears Dr. Kwan did not consider at all.
Dr. Cannon, we'll get to that, but first, what are the diagnoses that Dr. Kwan did consider?
According to Dr. Kwan's report, alcohol poisoning and pesticide poisoning were considered on the morning of Genesis petrillo's death.
And what are the diagnoses Dr. Kwan did not consider?
I found symptoms in Dr. Kwan's report that could match up with hepatic disease, an allergic reaction, or even pesticide poisoning through some means other than the wine. I also think that because I cannot rule out any of these medical emergencies, it's entirely possible that Genesis petrillo was experiencing one or even more of these medical emergencies on the morning of her death.
Dr. Cannon, I want to talk about Genesis petrillo. What were her symptoms?
So I've actually prepared a presentation to demonstrate Genesis petrillo's symptoms, if I might be available to show this to the court.
Your Honor, permission for Dr. Cannon to screen share her demonstration.
Is there any objection?
No objection, Your Honor.
All right, you may proceed. Are you asking to share this with the jury at the same time?
Yes, Your Honor, we are.
All right, you may proceed.
Okay, so this is the differential diagnosis for Genesis petrillo that I created after reviewing the evidence in the case.
Let's talk about the diagnoses that Dr. Kwan considered. Can you tell us a little bit about those and Genesis petrillo's symptoms?
Sure. So the symptoms that Genesis petrillo was experiencing on the morning of his death include nausea, stomach pain, vomiting, involuntary muscle spasms and seizures, impairment of motor function, and sweating. Now, Genesis petrillo's symptoms of pesticide poisoning include all of these, but also include contracted pupils, difficulty breathing, and low acetylcholinesterase levels.
And what about for the diagnoses Dr. Kwan did not consider? What were Genesis petrillo's symptoms for those?
Sure. I saw that Genesis petrillo had symptoms of an allergic reaction, which included nausea, stomach pain, vomiting, difficulty breathing, and watery eyes.
Earlier, you mentioned that there's a possibility of Genesis petrillo having experienced multiple of these diagnoses. Can you explain that?
Absolutely. Genesis petrillo could have experienced alcohol poisoning, an allergic reaction at the same time, an allergic reaction and hepatic disease at the same time, hepatic disease and alcohol poisoning at the same time, or honestly a combination of all three. This is what the chart looks like all filled in. As you can see, the symptoms line up very well. It's entirely possible with the symptoms that Genesis petrillo was experiencing, he could have been suffering from multiple of these illnesses.
Dr. Cannon, I want to be clear. What data did Dr. Kwan consider?
Sure. So if you look at the bottom of this chart, There were no tests run to definitively rule out any other possible diagnoses that were happening at the time. The only test that it appears Dr. Kwan requested was one to show pesticide poisoning, but to my knowledge, no other data was recorded.
Dr. Cannon, what is your evaluation of Dr. Kwan's analysis?
Or, to be perfectly honest, I find it unlikely because there are too many unknowns and flaws in Dr. Kwan's theory to definitively or even to a medical certainty claim that Genesis Petrillo died from ingesting wine that contained an organophosphate pesticide.
Dr. Cannon, what is your final conclusion in the death of Genesis Petrillo?
Due to the inability to rule out any alternate causes of death, I am unable to say definitively what killed Genesis Petrillo. Due to the lack of knowledge as to Petrillo's outside health factors at the time of his death, no one, including Dr. Kwan, can say what killed Genesis Petrillo.
Thank you, Dr. Cannon. Your Honor, I have no further questions at this time.
Cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor. Now proceed.
You may proceed. Thank you, sir.
Dr. Cannon, you didn't speak to anyone else involved in this case outside of the people who hired you, correct?
No, that is not standard in my field.
And you didn't do any examination outside of the documents you read, correct?
Can you be more specific? I'm sorry.
You didn't examine the body in today's case?
No, once again, that's not standard in my field. Also, by the time I actually received this case, the body has been cremated. However, in my field, it's entirely possible that accurate conclusions can be made without a body.
Understood. And so just so I'm clear, the defense paid you $50,000 without examining the body nor talking to anyone. Is that correct?
Nope, it is entirely standard in my field. That is the flat rate that my company charges.
You answered no, but you meant to answer yes, correct?
Oh, yeah, my apologies. Yes, I did mean to say yes.
No problem. Now, out of all the theories you gave, you agreed that the facts are most consistent with Genesis' death resulting from consuming poisonous wine, correct?
Yes, I would say that that is definitely most likely. However, I would not feel comfortable saying that that is what caused Genesis Petrillo's death to medical certainty or even more likely than not.
But you would feel comfortable saying that it is most consistent with Genesis' death resulting from consuming poisonous wine?
Yes, with the evidence that was listed by Dr. Kwan, it does appear that those symptoms would match up the best.
Now, regarding alcohol poisoning, you've never seen a fatality with anything less than a 0.30% blood alcohol level, correct?
That is correct.
And Genesis' blood alcohol level was 0.16%, correct?
At 2:52 a.m., Genesis Petrillo's blood alcohol concentration was 0.16%. However, I am not confident that that was Genesis Petrillo's peak blood alcohol content at the night before his death.
Isn't it true that you have no evidence that Genesis' alcohol level was anywhere near the 0.30%?
Well, that's what's so concerning. We just can't say for certain. We know that Genesis Petrillo stopped drinking roughly 2 to 3 hours before the blood alcohol concentration was taken. And in that time, blood alcohol concentration drops significantly once you stop drinking. So we can't say for certain.
Understood. And so even if alcohol poisoning was a possibility, that doesn't explain why Genesis' blood screening showed he ingested poison, correct?
Oh, no.
Now, regarding the allergic reaction, you have no evidence that Petrillo had any allergies, correct?
Yep. To my knowledge, Genesis Petrillo had not had a medical visit in the past 3 years, so no testing would have been done in that time to definitively prove that Genesis was experiencing some kind of allergy.
And so there was no record of any allergies, correct?
To my knowledge, no. However, it is entirely possible that an allergy can come on at any time, even later in life.
Now, you stated it's a possibility Petrillo consumed something else that was laced with this pesticide. You're aware all the leftover food was tested, correct?
Yes, I'm aware that the food that was not consumed at the wedding reception was tested. However, I believe that the food that actually was ingested was not tested.
And you got an opportunity to review Exhibit 6, the poison analysis, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
And you're aware Petrillo's stomach only contained food and wine, correct?
And pesticide.
Correct. And you're aware that the food was reported to not have been positive for the pesticide, correct?
Yes.
And you're aware that the only option left was the wine to be poisoned, correct?
The wine, I'm aware that the wine was mixed in with the pesticide. However, during digestion, the stomach mixes all of your stomach contents together. So it's possible that they were initially not together and then combined within the stomach.
You agree that the wine produced by the defendant is most likely the cause of pesticide poisoning, correct?
Yes, once again, I think that this is most likely. However, I would not say this to medical certainty or, once again, even more likely than not.
Thank you. Nothing further.
Any redirect for this witness?
No redirect, Your Honor. I just asked that Dr. Cannon be excused.
All right, we'll excuse Dr. Cannon. Dr. Court appreciates your time. Will there be any further evidence from the defense?
No, Your Honor. The defense rests and is ready to proceed to closing arguments.
All right, do we need to take up any matters before we proceed to closing?
The defense.
None from the plaintiff, Your Honor.
All right, another from the defense, right?
No, Your Honor.
All right. Does plaintiff wish to make a closing argument?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right. Jury's with you, sir. You may proceed.
Yes, Your Honor. May it please the court? Your Honor, members of the jury. Opposing counsel stated during their opening statement that there are too many questions and not enough answers. Members of the jury, you heard that there was only one Carroll wine bottle produced, not one out of thousands of bottles. Members of the jury, my name is Jabari McRae. Cutting costs leads to lives lost. You hear all the time about companies cutting costs and making decisions to increase profits only for those profits to be earned at the expense of their very own customers. And time again, these same companies get a slap on the wrist. Meanwhile, an entire family ends up being totally destroyed, dismembered, and dismantled. And that's exactly what the defense is trying to do here today. Genesis Petrillo went to his rehearsal dinner, a dinner planned for him and his fiancée, only to fall victim of the careless and reckless business practices of the same family he was just about to marry into. You learned today that Peonia Estates cut costs on adequate pesticide training for their employees. They cut costs and sacrificed proper storage of those pesticides. And they cut costs and sacrificed proper usage of those pesticides. And by cutting these measly costs, just to gain a few dollars, a life was lost, members of the jury. Now, before we go further into the actions of the defendant, I just want to take a brief moment to remember the life that was lost. Genesis Petrillo, a young life at that, members of the jury, 27 years of age. This was a supportive and loving fiance to Miss Casey Soto. He was a friend who had his whole life in front of him. Genesis will never get the chance to fulfill his true potential. He'll never get the chance to have a family with Casey. Nothing. On June 7, 2019, Genesis Petrillo took his last sip of wine, and then he took his last breath. He needlessly died, which left his fiancée, Casey Soto, all alone. Casey went overnight from planning a wedding to planning a funeral. Genesis arrived at his rehearsal dinner. He drank wine and he celebrated. But what Genesis did not know is that Peonia Estates was going under. That's why Harper wanted to have the wedding at Peonia Estates. More importantly, Genesis had no idea about the dangerous manner in which they were growing and preparing the wine. But how would he know that the defendant's careless actions of cutting costs was just about to lead to his life being lost? The answer to that question is he wouldn't. It wasn't his job. But you know whose job it was to protect their customers and people like Genesis and to follow the rules? It was the defendant's job. Peonia Estates, it was their job. A job they simply failed to do. Now, members of the jury, as the plaintiff in today's case, we're pursuing the claim of negligence per se, which simply means that we had to prove that Peonia Estates violated the statute. And if it wasn't for that, Genesis would still be here today. And we have to prove our case by a preponderance of the evidence, which simply means our job is to only prove that more likely than not, just a tiny bit more, that the defendant is liable. And we did that today by proving 4 things took place. The defendant violated the pesticide statute, which was a safety statute, and the defendant's actions caused the harm, and the plaintiff is a member of the protected class. Now, numbers 2 and 4 are already understood, so we are only here today to prove numbers 1 and 3, that the defendant is more likely, that it's more likely than not that the defendant violated the statute and the defendant's actions or omissions caused harm. And ladies and gentlemen, we met and surpassed that burden today, and here's why. When you ask yourself, is it more likely than not the defendant violated the statute? Well, you heard from Inspector O'Keefe that on November 5th, July 12th, and May 8th, she conducted inspections, and all three of those inspections revealed Peonia Estates was misusing and improperly storing pesticides. She tested the wine on July 12th, and it was positive for the presence of the very same pesticide that killed Genesis Petrillo, members of the jury. More likely than not. She gave them multiple chances to follow the rules, and it got to the point where she had to give them 45 days before they had to close their doors for good. The fact alone that the only inspector that inspected Peonia Estates stated that out of 3 visits, 3 of those reported that they did not follow pesticide rules. Inspector O'Keefe even saw them storing pesticides in the same room they bottled the wine, ladies and gentlemen. It's more likely than not they violated the statute. The defense witness, Austin Lewis, came before you and stated they fixed any problems regarding pesticide storage. That wasn't true. If it was, Genesis would still be here today. They said there were accidents and that it was his employees that violated the rules. Those are the words of the defense's own witness. Too costly to train, too costly to follow the rules. They stated the pesticide levels were low enough to where they didn't break the rules. Austin Lewis isn't a doctor. You learn from a real doctor, Dr. Kwan, who stated the slightest ingestion of this pesticide is deadly. Inspector O'Keefe from the FDA told you they broke the rules. Austin Lewis isn't an inspector. Instead of correcting their mistakes, they continued business as usual. And by failing to remove the pesticides from the wine bottling rooms, the wine, of course, became exposed to the pesticide. This was the wine bottling room, members of the jury. Lonnie Paris and Riley O'Keefe told you they saw pesticides in the same room Peonia Estates used to bottle their wine, which was the same room they held and stored the Carroll wine bottle, which is the same wine that killed Genesis Petrillo. The defendant's failure to remove that wine bottle was the direct and proximate cause of Genesis Petrillo's death. If they did not place pesticides in the same room they held and stored that bottle, Genesis would still be here today. All they had to do was follow the directions. All they had to do was keep pesticides away from wine production. You heard from the defense's own witness, Dr. Cannon, that she agrees it's more likely than not Genesis died from Harper Martini and Peonia Estates poisonous wine. She gave multiple theories, but there's only one answer, more likely than not, and she gave it to you. She told you it's more likely than not Genesis ingested Peonia Estates poisonous wine. Even Peonia Estates believed it was more likely than not their entire Cara collection was contaminated. Why else would a failing company throw out their entire product? They knew it was likely when they were reprimanded for breaking the rules on November 5th, on July 12th, and again on May 8th. They knew it was likely when they were placed on a 45-day probation and only given 45 days to remain open for this very same reason. You would think they learned their lesson when one of their employees almost died because of this very same thing. They had an employee almost die on the job for drinking poisonous wine that was contaminated with the very same pesticide that killed Genesis Petrillo. Do you think this was a wake-up call for Peonia Estates? It wasn't. They were more worried about cutting costs than lives lost. Imagine if your water company decided that pesticide-filled water was too expensive to filter, and they decided to just bottle the water up and sell it. There are laws against these practices, members of the jury, and Midland's Code 12-100 states proper precautions and restrictions must be in place to protect customers from ingesting poisonous items. But Peonia Estates, they don't follow the rules, ladies and gentlemen. But that stops here today. No more lives lost due to cutting costs. So you have to ask yourself, if Peonia Estates would have followed the rules, is it more likely that Genesis would still be alive? The answer to that question is yes, members of the jury. And therefore, we ask you to find the defendant liable. Thank you.
Thank you, counsel. Does the defense wish to make a closing argument?
Yes, Your Honor. May I proceed?
You may. The jury's with you, ma'am.
Opposing counsel stated on his closing argument, only one Cara wine bottle was produced, and that it was that bottle that killed Genesis Petrillo. You never heard that from any witness today. All 3 of the plaintiff's own witnesses said that they could not know how many bottles of Cara wine was produced or how many could have been in the winery at the time of Genesis Petrillo's death, and that they don't know how Genesis Petrillo died. We have now heard all of the evidence in today's case. That is it. There is no more. And it is sad that the plaintiff is standing before you trying to cover up the truth. They're doing that because they didn't have enough evidence to prove to you today that it was more likely than not that Peony Estates failed to meet all the proper requirements for pesticides, and that was a result of Genesis Petrillo's death. You see, our witnesses, and even some of the plaintiff's own witnesses, highlighted questions in today's case that the plaintiff just doesn't want you to know about. At the end of the day, we don't know if the pesticides in Genesis Petrillo's system were from the Cara 2019 wine. We don't even know if Genesis Petrillo died from pesticide poisoning. And why Genesis Petrillo's death is tragic. It wasn't Peony Estates' fault. Nobody can say for certain what killed Genesis Petrillo, and that is the real crime in today's case. Members of the jury, I want you to think to yourselves, why would Peony Estates do this? Why would the top winery in Midlands put their customers at risk and risk their entire reputation that they had spent years building? That's an answer the plaintiff doesn't have for you today. Why? Because it just doesn't make sense. Think about it. Peony Estates, the top winery in Midlands, was built from the ground up to success, would risk their entire reputation and their customers' health? I don't think so. You heard from Danny Francasio that Peony Estates is a well-established business in Midlands, who has hosted hundreds of weddings, receptions, conferences, you name it. Why would Peony Estates throw that all away? When they were confronted with pesticide problems, they corrected them. Nothing else mattered. Those were the words of Austin Lewis, the head winemaker who was in charge of pesticides. He told his employees in a memo to get to work and to get rid of the issue. They weren't concerned about money. They invested their money into correcting the problem. Mr. Lewis organized trainings for the entire winery to learn about proper pesticide issues. He told you how they were determined to fix this, that they tried organic pesticides, they didn't work, so they tried again. They were determined to maintain their reputation. Throwing that all away just doesn't make sense. The plaintiff's evidence in today's case didn't give you any answers because it's just not true. Let's talk about the plaintiff's claim. They brought forth a charge of negligence per se in today's case. They had to prove by preponderance of the evidence, or more likely than not, that Peony Estates mishandled pesticides and that mishandling allegedly was the cause of Genesis Petrillo's death. Members of the jury, the plaintiff did not even come close to proving their case today. The evidence just doesn't add up. There are too many questions and not enough answers. The plaintiff had to prove to you today that Peony Estates violated Midlands Section 12100 by failing to place adequate restrictions and precautions in place. Peony Estates Harper Martini would die before he let his winery lose his reputation. He wanted his daughter to carry on his legacy. Nothing else mattered to Peony Estates besides their reputation and their employees. All of the plaintiff's witnesses, Inspector O'Keefe, Lonnie Paris, Dr. Kwan, and no one else can be sure that that bottle was the same one that Harper Martini gave to Genesis Petrillo on the night of her death. And that is what the plaintiff has based their entire case on. Now, the plaintiff also had to prove to you today that Genesis Petrillo's death resulted from the negligence of Peony Estates. But what they don't want you to know about is that there were questions unanswered. Dr. Kwan, the treating physician of Genesis Petrillo, did not even consider. She tried to confuse you today by saying that she tested Mr. Petrillo's blood. She did, but only for pesticides. Make no mistake, members of the jury, Dr. Kwan failed to even run a basic blood panel on Genesis Petrillo the night of his death that would have yielded much more results that could have ruled out most other diagnoses that Dr. Kwan failed to consider. Opposing counsel told you that Dr. Cannon said it was more likely than not that pesticide poisoning from the one wine bottle was the cause of Genesis Petrillo's death. You never heard her say that today. You heard Dr. Cannon tell you how it was inefficient for Dr. Kwan to run one pesticide test and claim that that was the result of Genesis Petrillo's death. Dr. Cannon said that the most likely out of several possibilities that Dr. Kwan could not rule out could probably be the cause of death of Genesis Petrillo, but not more likely than not. Genesis Petrillo's death was tragic. And it is terrible how the plaintiff doesn't have the evidence to give him proper justice. We are left with too many questions and not enough answers. Peony Estates didn't act negligently. They were a well-respected business adapting to an environmental problem. They put in the work. They cared about their employees and their reputation. It makes no sense why they would do this. And it makes no sense to consider the plaintiff's evidence sufficient. Find Peony Estates not liable. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Is there a rebuttal from the plaintiff?
Yes, Your Honor.
You may proceed, sir.
Yes, Your Honor. Don't be fooled, members of the jury. No one has seen any other wine bottle. There was one wine bottle. Austin Lewis told you they threw all the other leftover wine because Genesis died. That's why. Because it was poisoned. Opposing counsel stated that we don't know if the poison came from the wine. Don't be fooled. We know Genesis only drank Carroll wine on that evening. Exhibit 5 was the blood analysis that shows all the vitals were tested. Too many questions and not enough answers. There's one question and there's one answer. What did Genesis ingest that caused his death? We know Genesis died from pesticide poison. We know from the poison analysis that the poison was in Genesis' stomach. Furthermore, we know that it was not in the food and it was only in the wine. The only doctor to treat Genesis confirmed that. The defense own witness also confirmed that it's more likely than not that Dr. Kwan's conclusion is correct. Don't be fooled, members of the jury. Find them liable.
All right, folks. Congratulations. I am genuinely impressed. I'm going to take a moment to introduce myself, make a couple of comments to give the other two folks an opportunity to complete their ballots and send them on. As the presiding judge, I was not given a ballot. I'm not a scoring judge. And I've got to be perfectly honest with you. I'm grateful for that because this was a remarkably good trial from both sides. My name is Mark Boynton. I'm a trial attorney with the Winston-Salem office of Kilpatrick Townsend. My focus is on products liability, construction, environmental litigation. I'm also the coach of the national trial team at Wake Law and the director of the trial team's program. And so I get to see folks doing this kind of work at the law school level all the time. And I genuinely hope all of you are planning to go on to law school, and I hope you're planning to apply to Wake, because I would welcome you guys coming and participating in our trial ad program. I do want to give, I don't want to waste y'all's time because I know you've got a full day and I know how exhausting competition weekend is, but I do want to go ahead and give Amanda and Chris an opportunity to make some comments. So Amanda, would you like to go first? Ladies first.
So we just submit our ballots. I think we have to wait from Chris to have the all clear from Scott and Elliot just to make sure that the ballots are properly submitted before we're allowed to make comments.
you can't even give constructive criticism as we wait.
It's my understanding we have to wait for the clear before we can give, I submit my ballot already.
Okay.
But I don't want to be the reason for any dispute.
Okay. All right.
I've already submitted, and I just texted the staff, so I think that we're clear for comments.
Okay. Great. I'll keep mine brief. I know you guys have a busy day. I am Amanda Manzano. I'm a 3L at Wake Forest. I'm on Coach Boynton's trial team. So he taught me and is a very gifted teacher and trial attorney. So I'll be quick so you can get to his.
You're not getting any special treatment, Manzano.
Yes, you deserve it. You're all so poised, so professional. I'm very impressed with all of you, witnesses and attorneys alike. Just a couple constructive comments that might help you throughout the competition, throughout the rest of your mock trial career. When you're making an objection, first consider, does this objection actually help me? Just because you can make an objection doesn't necessarily mean that you should. And to that end, after the objection is ruled, you might feel relieved that the objection is out of the way or relieved at the ruling that you got, but really listen. There was a hearsay objection early on in the trial, and immediately the next answer from the witness was, she told me that, and the objection was not renewed. So anytime you hear she told me, he told me, really perk up. Cross-exam questions for all crossing attorneys, keep them short. One, it's easier for your witness to understand you. Sometimes there was genuine confusion from the witness that I believe to be genuine because the questions were just kind of long, to be honest. So break them up. You're more likely to get clearer answers. And also it's your chance to testify, and you want to make sure that your jury, or in this case, your audience, your judges, are really following your own testimony on cross. And to that end, slow down a little bit. A few of you tend to speed up as you're talking, or you're confident in your question, which is great, but slow down so that your jury can take it in, your judges can take it in. One last tiny thing, in evidentiary arguments, a few of you would say things like, I believe, I think, remove yourself from those arguments. The judge knows that you want it in or you don't, but keep it objective and about the evidence itself. But you guys are all great. Congratulations. Really well done.
Chris?
Hey, good morning, everybody. So my name is Chris Fleury. I'm also a third-year law student at Wake Forest, and I certainly would like to echo Mark and Amanda in saying, exceptional job overall, and I really appreciate you all for joining us this morning and for letting us see, a really interesting and fantastically done trial. I have more detailed comments that I submitted via the little web form. So you can get into those if you want to see the nitnoid details of my thoughts throughout the trial. Amanda really hit a lot of the stronger points that I would like to make. And the number one point that I would like to reiterate is please slow down, particularly on cross, particularly on your closings and openings and stuff like that. There were quite a few times throughout the course of the trial where I felt myself a little bit behind in what was going on. And I saw something, there was often like where a crossing witness and the crossing attorney would both be running together. And particularly if that's you, if you're that crossing witness, slow that attorney down, control that a little bit, right? And then also on crosses too, again, echo Amanda, make sure that you break those questions up. There were a lot of pretty complex, pretty complicated questions, and breaking those up into a few pieces makes them more effective. And then also on crosses, you don't have to hit every point on cross. Just try to hit one or two strong points. I will say that particularly with the witnesses, and we had a lot of very credible and very likable witnesses, and often the cross point right off the bat was to go after that witness's credibility. And I thought that was brilliantly done. Of course, if you have a likable witness, you want to immediately go and try to get the judge or the juror to throw everything that they just heard out the window. So kudos on that. But in general, make sure on crosses that you do slow everything down, and that you do just focus on those one or two points that you really have to get across. But overall, wonderful job, and you know, I really can't say enough positive about the witnesses. I felt like the witnesses, many of them were very likable and very much brought the trial to life at this point. So thank you.
Chris, Amanda, thank you both for some really good, insightful comments. Makes me feel good to hear you guys saying these things. These are the very same comments you hear us giving you when we're coaching your rounds. So I'm not going to repeat what Amanda and Chris said. I am going to say that advocates and witnesses alike, y'all are doing an outstanding job. I hate it as a coach, and I hated it as a competitor when I would get these hollow, vacuous comments from the bench at the end of a round. Oh, you guys are so great. You guys did everything great. And I know that's bullshit, because there's something I did that made somebody mad. There's something I did that somebody was like, oh man, what an idiot, you know? I didn't have those moments today. I'm very serious about that. I really enjoyed this round, and I've seen a lot of competition rounds at the law school level that would not have held muster. Either side here, witness and advocate, could have gone up against many of the law school teams that we compete against, and you would have more than held your own. I think you would have won some rounds. I know you would have won some rounds that we've been in. Trial advocacy is part art, part science. It is very much about storytelling, and I think everybody understands that. I would just say, stop pretending to be a lawyer sometimes and just talk to people. Okay, just talk to people. Y'all have great themes, beautiful themes, and I saw it woven through each case, right? You got the trial problem. It's a pain because of what it is, but y'all understand how to do it. But when you're doing your direct examination, just have a conversation. There is no way to sound like a lawyer, so just have a conversation with that witness. Make that witness the most important thing. Even when it's on video, you can still convey that. And certainly when you're in the space of a courtroom with a jury, with a judge, just have a conversation. Cross-exam, it's all about control. I am going to echo one point. Break those questions down, baby steps with that witness so they don't have as much opportunity to wander on you. Now, it's a competition, right? Witnesses, they make their pay by trying to wander on you. That's the nature of a competition. And in the real world, there are witnesses who will do this as well. But don't worry about it, because your judges and your juries in real life, they are sophisticated, okay? You hear a lot of jokes made about juries are the first people you meet at Walmart, or people who have an average 8th grade education. It makes me mad when I hear that, because I'm going to tell you something. Everybody on a jury, they're doing an excellent job, and they're doing the best they can, and they're smart. And if that witness is causing you problems, your competition judges will know that. They'll score accordingly. A jury will know that, and all it's going to do is hurt that witness's credibility. Don't get angry with a witness. Don't get in a fight with a witness. Don't ever interrupt the witness. If a witness is really wandering, you let them finish, and you just take a beat of silence and go, Mr. Smith, you done? Okay. Then you go head on to your next question. So you communicate, this witness is wasting your time and my time. I'm just trying to get some answers, okay? I really, really appreciated the deference and the professionalism of everybody up here. I never got a moment where I thought you were angry at the other side or angry at a witness. And I see that a lot. I see it in the real world, and I see it a lot in competitions. I commend you, your coaches, everybody in your programs. You guys are truly doing some really high level work here. And I want you to accept that and enjoy it. And I want you guys to have fun. There are some moments today where I felt like some of you felt like it was work. And I know it is that, because it's a pain and it's nerve wracking, but just remember, this is supposed to be fun for you guys. Nobody's real life, nobody's real business is hanging on this. Enjoy that while you can, because when you get out in the real world, somebody's life, somebody's business is really hanging in this. If they're at trial, reason has failed somewhere, and they are letting strangers decide a life decision for them, and it's nerve-wracking. So enjoy this process while you can, because it is fun. It's supposed to be fun. I can see some of you, I can't see all of you, but I got to ask this. It's been burning in me as soon as I got the trial materials this morning. Show of hands, who thinks there was murder? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. No, Plaintiff, I love it. He's like, hell no, this was negligence. This was not murder. Okay. Y'all have to flip sides, right? So the people who did the defense have to do the plaintiff, right? Okay. So anybody who wants to answer this real quick, that exhibit 24, that note threatening, has anybody tried to get that into evidence? Have plaintiffs' teams tried to do that at all?
We've only faced teams that have used negligence, and we can't use any of the battery evidence on a negligence case.
And so that's just there for battery.
Right. Normally, I'm a battery attorney. Curiously enough, we haven't had this admitted by the opposing counsel yet.
Fascinating. Okay. Well, listen, I've probably taken up too much of your time already, but I really did. I'm going to say it one more time. I really did want to impress upon you how impressed we were with your work. These are not hollow comments. The two people here that are talking to you, they are seasoned, experienced, veteran competitors. Not only that, they're also a couple of law students that have actually been out in the real world and have seen a lot. And so they're not talking to you just as a quote unquote student. These are adults. They could go try cases right now. The only thing stopping them is that they haven't technically graduated and passed a bar exam yet, but they could kick a lot of lawyers' asses that I see in court all the time. So when you hear these comments and they're complimenting you, take that to heart, but also listen to what they told you. They were good comments that can really help you improve. Okay. Any questions for us? Any questions for any of the judges? Okay. I guess we're done. Congratulations to y'all. Please convey our congratulations to your coaches and your program. Thank you all so much. Really well done.
Thank you.